Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be talking about the books that I read in March. First, I read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oinkun Braithwaite. This book starts off with older sister Korede getting a call from her younger sister Ayoola and finding out that Ayoola has killed yet another one of her boyfriends. Everything about this book reminded me so much of Midsomer Murders. That is exactly the kind of opening that they would have in a Midsomer Murders episode, but not just like the murder aspect. I think it was the tone of the book that really reminded me of that TV show. It walks this really fine line between reality and this kind of heightened comedy horror thriller reality. The book is entirely told from Korede's perspective and it's told in really short chapters. Some of them were only a couple pages long. Normally I prefer books where you can really get lost in the story, which is usually a lot easier when there are really long chapters or really long scenes, but I actually didn't mind it in this book. I think because the book was less about the plot and more about the kind of themes that the author was talking about, the short chapters worked really well. There's lots of mentions of social media. The younger sister is always on Snapchat and Instagram. She is like the stereotype of a young person always needing to communicate what she's up to and what she's doing. She's quite selfish and vain and takes the people who help her around her for granted. She is the exact stereotype of, I guess, a young millennial on the internet. But the way it's portrayed in the book I found was really funny and wasn't criticizing the stereotype as such, but rather just playing around with it. And I felt like the social media aspects were integrated really well and didn't feel really forced in the way that social media can feel in novels. Mainly, I think the book is about the perpetuation of abusive behavior through generations. So through flashbacks, we find out that the sister's father was really abusive towards them and their mother, and we see Ayoola acting out this violent behavior just like her father, but we also see the older sister Korede repeating the behavior of her mother, who would always protect their father, and even though he's been long dead, she still protects him and doesn't let anyone outside of their immediate family find out what a horrible person he really was. And Korede does the exact same thing with Ayoola. So yeah, I thought it was really fun and creepy. I would definitely check out the author's next book. Next, I read A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. Anyone who's watched my channel will know that I love A Room with a View and Howard's End, so I've always meant to keep reading the rest of his works. This one I think is considered by a lot of people as his best novel, or maybe his most mature novel. It was certainly the last one that he wrote and the last one to be published in his lifetime. I did not like this one as much as the other two books, and I think that's mainly because it feels so much more dated, because it is a white person talking about a country that is not his. As much as I'm sure E.M. Forster had great intentions when going into the book, and it's very clear that he is anti-British imperialism in terms of he doesn't believe that the British should be in India. As is usual with E.M. Forster, this book is full of a lot of characters who get their own points of view. Effectively, it centers around three characters: a Muslim Indian doctor called Aziz, a British teacher called Mr. Fielding who's working in India, and a young woman called Adela who has recently arrived in India and is determining whether she wants to marry this British person who currently works in India. E.M. Forster's subtlety with the way that he writes characters is still apparent in this novel. His characters are so changeable that it's kind of hard to root for any of them or even really like them, because they are so human. There are so many good and bad aspects to them. They change their opinions about things all the time, and it certainly makes you realize how hard it really is to portray humans in stories, because when they are portrayed realistically, it kind of is disconcerting. The blurb on the back of the novel states that the plot is about something that happens in these caves just out of the town where all the characters are staying and living, where Adela believes that she is attacked by Aziz in one of the caves, and so there's a whole court proceeding. That part of the plot doesn't actually happen until the very middle of the story. The whole first part of the book is entirely just setting up the characters and setting up the toxic atmosphere between the British living in the town and the Indian people living there. There are definitely a lot of massive generalizations about both the British people and the Indian people, but the way Ian Forster writes, it's really hard to tell whether these opinions are meant to be coming from the characters themselves or whether he himself believes in these generalizations. I like to think that it is the former. Forster divides the Indian people into Muslims and Hindus, and it is really only Muslim Indians that get a point of view. The Hindu Indians are kind of there for background in a way, which is definitely the biggest problematic part of the book, I think. The book is written in 1924, by the way. There is some absolutely horrific racism on the British part, which you can tell Forster is definitely condemning. You've also got the character of Ronnie, who's the guy that Adela is planning on marrying, and he believes that he is there for a real reason, that if the British weren't there, then there would be a lot of fighting between Muslim and Hindu Indians. So he believes that the British have a genuine peacekeeping task that keeps them in India and makes them necessary to the country, even though very clearly through the story we as the audience know that it would be much better off if the British left everyone else alone. I thought the book was good as a representation of a British person's perspective from the time. Until the third part, I felt like it dragged on a bit despite being quite a short book, and I felt like the third part was quite unnecessary. It gave you more details about what happens to the characters after the big main court event, but I felt like I didn't really need to know that. I'm still very curious to read the rest of Forster's writing, but I don't think this is one that I will be rereading. Next, I read Beyond Carousel by Brendan Ritchie. This is the sequel to the book Carousel that I read last year. This is a local author, and that book was set in a real-life shopping centre in my city about these 4 young people who got trapped in the shopping centre, and we presume some sort of apocalypse has happened as they survive in the shopping centre and make use of all the supermarkets and shops. So this book is about the 3 main characters, twin sisters Taylor and Lizzie, who are a Canadian singing duo and are very obviously based on Tegan and Sarah. And then you've also got the main character Knox, who is just some arts graduate from Perth. Because a key part of the first novel was the fact that these characters were trapped inside a shopping centre, and that is taken away in this book. I wasn't sure whether the suspense would be able to be kept up. I think it was for the most part. It definitely wasn't quite as tense as the first book, but that was probably a good thing because I got really stressed out reading that first book. It was really cool to see pretty much every part of Perth that I've been to described in a novel. The characters travel to the hills, they travel to the CBD, they go north to Joondalup and south to Fremantle. It also made me a bit anxious though, because apocalyptic novels make me anxious anyway, because I know if I found myself in that situation, I would probably just lie down and cry because I couldn't get a hot shower or something. So reading about my city being described as a deserted wasteland is terrifying. There's one part where the skyscrapers in the CBD like blow up because of gas being built up under the city. That was a properly terrifying moment, which I'm sure was the author's intention, because those skyscrapers can be seen from almost every part of Perth because they are the only tall thing in the city, and they're such a permanent fixture of the city and something that's kind of reassuring because you know they'll always be there. To have those not there, it was just like the final nail in the coffin for the city. This book kind of expands on why the apocalypse has happened and explores this idea that one guy has set this off because he wants artists to do a form of residence, because he believes that the distractions of the modern world are stopping people from making great art, so they need an apocalypse to happen so they can actually focus and make great art again. Though then, of course, what makes great art is such a matter of taste, and some of the so-called great art that was described in the novel didn't particularly sound that great to me. Things were definitely answered from the first novel, but there are still so many questions left over, and I don't think the author is intending on writing another novel. I'd like to know more answers, but I think the ending was probably the best way to end it. Next, I read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I remember when this came out and I heard the premise and I thought, that's not for me. I have no interest in another story about a young woman having an affair with an older married man. So although I was intending on reading Normal People, I wasn't intending on reading this one, but I have Normal People on request in my library. When I requested, I was about 40 in line. I'm now 7 in line, so still probably a few more weeks to go, and I thought it would be really interesting to compare the two. I actually quite enjoyed this book, so now I'm even more curious to see what I think of Normal People. I think if any other author had written this story, I would have DNF'd it from the first page. It is basically about these 2 university students in Dublin. The main character is Frances. She and her friend Bobby do performance poetry, and that is where they meet this photographer and writer Melissa and her husband Nick. Bobby becomes fascinated with Melissa and Frances becomes infatuated with Nick. It really is, as the title suggests, educated middle-class people having pretentious conversations about the world and life in general, and I can definitely see how someone could get really annoyed with this book, but for me it was Sally Rooney's writing that kept me engaged. I weirdly really related to the main character, despite the fact that I would never do any of the things that she does in this book. Possibly something about the way the other characters describe her as emotionless and without affection. I don't know, there was something in there that I just felt like I could be friends with this person. I'd find her behavior highly annoying, but as a person herself, I felt like I could be friends with her. Probably the most annoying part about this book is that none of the dialogue has quotation marks. I know a lot of books do this, but I find it annoying every time. Like, we've created this system of language to communicate more effectively, and when you just take away that system, all you get is a communication that that is less effective than it could have been. It possibly is something that I've learnt from working in a newspaper where we have to stick to a very strict style, but I'm really hoping Normal People has quotation marks. And I really didn't like the end, though I think I understand why Sally Rooney chose this end. I presume it is because she wanted to look at the idea of people just perpetuating their behaviors even if they know that they're not the best behaviors, and that people on the whole really can't change much, which I understand, but it still frustrated me. So yeah, as I said, really excited to see what Normal People is like because I really enjoyed the writing style. Also in March, I finished reading the first series of Del Toro Quest. I said in my last wrap up that these just get better and better as they go along. I think The Valley of the Lost is my favorite one. A real highlight of the series is the puzzles that are scattered throughout, that the characters have to solve and you can also solve them yourself, like word games and spot the difference and that kind of thing. And the plot of this one completely is around this guy on the front cover who lives in the Valley of the Lost and gets the main characters to solve a riddle so that they can get the final gem to go in the belt. The final book, Return to Del, features the best plot twist. I vaguely remembered the plot twist, so it wasn't a massive surprise, but it's still really effective even if you know it's coming. These books really are violent. I'd forgotten quite how graphically violent they are and really scary. I think this one, Maze of the Beast, is probably the scariest one. Like, this beast on the front cover is the one that they have to like fight off in the story, and it's so scary. I'm excited to move on to the second series, which only has 3 books in it, but I think the books are a bit longer than these ones. Before I go, I just want to mention a readathon that Jacqueline from 6 Minutes for Me and Doris from Aldi Books has started. It's called Aussie April, and it's a readathon to encourage everyone to read Australian books in April. There are some prompts which I will link in the description, and I will link their videos about the readathon as well. I think I watched their videos about it yesterday and just got super excited to join in because, as you all know, I love reading books about my country and written by people from my country. I'm now trying to work out which books to read in April, which is the hardest part, as these are the Australian books that I have on my bookshelf that I haven't read yet, and there are so many more in the library that I want to read as well, so I'm finding it really hard to choose. So I'll go through them quickly, and if anyone's read any of these and can recommend one that they think I would really like, then please do leave a comment below. So I've got The Transit of Venus by Shirley Hazard. We've got Bliss by Peter Carey, The Children by Charlotte Wood, The Love of a Bad Man by Laura Elizabeth Walcott, Unpolished Gem by Alice Pung, Offence Around the Cuckoo by Ruth Park, though she is from New Zealand originally, and I think a lot of this book is set in New Zealand, so this might not be quite right for this readathon, and a local author, AJ Betts, with her book Zack and Mia. If you have any Australian books on your TBR, do join in, and I might make a video recommending where to start with Australian books if you've never read any. So that's all I read in March. Thank you so much for watching. If you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts on them below, and I will see you next time. Bye!